Ed appeared instantly in the game. He used his status as a noble to hit on the main character's childhood friend but ended up being hit. However, since he's vengeful and malicious, he messed with the main character's entrance exam, only to be caught by the princess, who was hiding her identity, Phoenicia Elias Claw. She has an ability called Insight that detects when someone is lying, and she used this to expose Ed, which got him out of the dorm and made everyone hate Ed. She asks him again what he's doing here, asking why he isn't expelled. He says that he was only kicked out of the dorms. She says that she'll keep it short, telling him to leave. She can't stand seeing someone so shameless around the school. She'll request his expulsion personally. While she yaps, he realizes that his food is burning, and he says this whole situation is a crisis since she's a princess. She truly has the power to get him expelled. He says he has a plan. He tells her that the sun will set soon, and aren't the royals meant to be guarded? So, to think a princess would come to this isolated forest all by herself. She says if he's trying to threaten her, he'll regret it. He says it's not a threat. He starts to kneel, saying he's just thanking her. She uses insight and asks what he means but instantly sees that he's telling the truth. She's surprised. He says good, while explaining to us viewers that the Rothtailor are influential, but by using that name to exploit the citizens and doing human experiments for eternal life, they get hated by the main character, and they all end up being imprisoned or executed. But he's disowned now. His fish is burnt now, and he says it's better to eat that than to starve. But it's a good chance to convince Phoenia since if he doesn't, it'll be game over for him. He says that since there's a week until school, there's only one reason Phoenia is out in the woods. He tells her that since she's here without her guards, it must be for the class placement test. It's a test from Professor Glast, which tasks those who accept it to find magic beads in the forest. Ed says that it's a rough one, and since it's Phoenia, she'll for sure be aiming for Class A. She asks if he's trying to flatter her, saying he hasn't changed one bit, and she'll go get him expelled now. He tells her that without his help she'll never be able to enter Class A. If his words are a lie, he'll accept the expulsion. He tells her to go to the lake at the southeast of the forest. She'll find a small grassy island with a giant tree in the middle of the island. The tree is called Mela's guardian tree, and underneath the roots, there will be a present that is left for her. We see her holding a bead and she says that the Ed from a few days ago was definitely lying scum. However, the Ed just now is the complete opposite, and she's lost for words. It jumps to the class placement test finally being over, and Glass tells everyone to take out the beads they've acquired. We see some odd beads that do not belong in this mana, and he tells them all they'll start in Class F. The test isn't about finding any magic bead, and those who found beads lacking in magic power are the only ones to make Class A. Only 3 people found them, a man named Zix, a woman named Lural, and lastly, the one who found a bead with the highest magic power, none other than Phoenia, who is declared the top of the class. It jumps back to Ed. He says he doesn't have the strength to hold a spear anymore. We see he's made a crude fishing rod, and he's using a small nail as bait. He explains how since she was young, Phoenia has seen through flattery and sophistry, which led to her insight skill being developed, which nobody can lie through. So he had no choice but to be honest with her, which in turn will create a bigger problem. The reason why Phoenia will come to be called the Princess of Love after being placed in F-class, but now she won't end up in F-class since she found the bead, so the original story will begin to collapse. Even if he manages to avoid being expelled, all the information he has would become useless. We got roped along. It turns out that Phoenia isn't top of her class, it's a sleeping girl named Lucy Merrill, so the future might not change. Phoenia starts to think about the situation and how Ed didn't lie about the bead, but it isn't her present. She hid her identity since she didn't want special treatment. She wanted to prove herself. She knew the bead would give good results, but she didn't want to take it since it isn't something she'd have accomplished on her own. And the title Princess of Love isn't a skill or a stat but a title she'd gained from walking a righteous path. He threw the bead out as bait. Whether it was the truth or not didn't matter, Phoenia could tell anyways. He believed that she'd fail, and she thought she'd succeed and rub it into his face. But Ed didn't lie to her about her not being able to enter Class A, and Phoenia was left unable to do anything. Ed pulls his line out of the river, showing that he's actually managed to catch a fish, so he won't be starving today. It cuts to later with him running in the woods. He says that he may be living far from school and has to leave really early in the morning to get to school on time, but that's fine with him as he's still in the academy. The school opening ceremony begins, and while a teacher is giving a speech, some of the other students start to whisper about Ed, asking how dare he show his face here. But we see him absolutely munching away, saying he plans to enjoy every minute of it. Some girls start to talk about how he looks like a noble as he eats, but they stop gossiping and head off to go find some desserts. One of the girls says that's strange, saying that Ed feels like a different person now. It jumps again to the dean's office, and Ed looks ghostly pale, saying he almost got expelled. He didn't think that Phineas would tell the dean about him, though seeing how the dean was smiling, it must not have been bad. He sighs in relief, saying he needs to make sure the story doesn't stray from the original. Ed explains how his skills are focused towards survival currently, and to pair that with the magic he's training, there's no better weapon than a bow. As he downs a rabbit, he explains he'll be able to craft good quality arrows and put magic formulas on them. While he's looking at the rabbit he caught, he's surprised when he sees the girl from earlier reading under a tree. We're introduced to her, she's Yunuka Failover, and she's a genius spirit sorcerer. She looks over at him and says it seems like he's the amusing one that Marilla was talking about. She quickly hops over and introduces herself to him. She asks if he's surprised that she knows about him, and she explains that the forest is the territory of Marilla, a high-ranking spirit, and she talked about him. He asks what she said, and Yunuka says that Marilla is nosy, so she's been keeping an eye on Ed. He looks awkwardly at the rabbit he's holding and doesn't know what to say. Yunuka reassures him it's fine since the natural order is for creatures in the forest to eat one another. Marilla doesn't mind. Ed says it looks like even a giant wolf has a tender heart, and Yunuka looks curiously, saying that's unexpected and laughs. Then she says she has something to show him. She holds her hands out, saying that she signed a contract with this little guy yesterday. She asks if he wants to touch it, and he says if he wants to befriend her, he needs to chime in at the right time, but quickly sighs, telling her he cannot see spirits. She's surprised that he can't, and he tells her yeah, and he only came for some food, so he'll be going. He decides it's best to try and keep the story just like the original, and Yunuka, someone who is very important to the storyline, is someone he must not get close to. She watches him walk away. She recalls him mentioning the wolf thing, then pets Marilla, who is a wolf, saying it's interesting since it really seemed like he couldn't see her at all, so how'd he know she's a wolf? She jumps into Marilla's fur, saying she tried so hard to be nice to him, but he just answered with yep and yep over and over. She says geez, but it's not like they won't see each other again, so she'll just take it slow. Ed explains how the distance between his shelter and the academy isn't close at all. He barely makes it running at full speed, leaving at dawn, but it increases his stats. And if he wants the scholarship, he has to study more diligently. He writes on a stone slab using a burned stick on his way home. He washes his clothes, then he checks if he has enough firewood and food for tomorrow, which means he only sleeps for 4 hours. But that's not what is bothering him. He asks Yunuka how long she's going to keep following him. She's surprised he knew, and he says it'd be stranger if he didn't. He asks if she doesn't know who he is, saying he's the delinquent Ed, so why is she here? She says that's just what others think of him, and she smiles, saying she doesn't even know him yet. He says this is the type of character Yunuka is. She may look naive, but she's a really independent thinker. However, knowing what's in store for her in the future, he can't just respond with a blank smile on his face because Yunuka is the final boss of the first act. Even though she's the only character who smiles and is nice to him, he didn't want to do this. He says since destiny brought them together, can she do him a favor? She asks what, all excited, and he says surely she can see that he's a mess and that he's having a hard time. Then he asks her for some money. She turns into stone. He says he'll pay her back, and this is what friends are for, asking how much money she has. He lets us viewers know that she's always the top of her class, so she has a scholarship. But her background is extremely poor, so without the scholarship, she can't enroll or advance to a higher class in school. Being the daughter of a small ranch, her biggest weakness is money. She blankly stares at him, then says sorry while fading out. He looks guilty, and 3 days go by without her coming back. He says he feels bad about it, but he doesn't want to get entangled with the important characters, so he'll be careful so the story does not stray. He heads back into his shelter, then drops his basket out of surprise since someone even more important to the story than Yunuka just arrived. She's a rare genius and the most powerful character in the game. It's Lucy Merrill, who is sleeping in his shelter. She wakes up, and he wonders why she's here, saying he's too loud and she can't sleep. He says he wasn't saying anything, and she says not him, but the wolf behind him won't stop talking to him. Of course, it's Marilla, who is asking him to someday save Yunuka at all costs.